Good evening, everybody. My name is Vince Lacroce, and welcome to La Voce with Lacroce. This is episode 2, very important topic, something that's very dear to my heart, mental health. We have a panel of 3 amazing guys. To my left, as you can see, is Gabriel. Give a wave, Gabriel. Say hi to everybody. We got Jonathan at the bottom, good friend of mine as well. And at my far right is my cousin Fabio, who's also a psychologist, who was joining us about this conversation. Before we begin, I'll just give you the little idea of why I was inspired to do this. A couple of years ago, I received a call from a former student of mine and found out, unfortunately, that one of the students that I worked very close with took their life. And it has forever changed me and the work that I do in my current profession. I work as a spiritual community animator at the English Montreal School Board. I've been doing that for about 17 years, almost 18 years. I also freelance and do videography, photography, and graphic design. Also event planning with Lacroce Designs. But my passion is wanting to help people. And today, I've invited 3 different perspectives and 3 great guys who can share a little bit about mental health. All of them, have their own stories that they may choose to share with you. So we'll start with Gabriel to my left. And Gabriel, welcome and thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here, Vince. So here, look, I think the best way to describe my mental health story is really, I have to say that I pretty much started like a very humble beginning, in the sense of like I was a very, very insecure kid in high school, extremely skinny. I felt like I didn't really feel like manly and strong. And I guess that sort of stems from the fact that, let's say, I consider my dad to be like my superhero, or like the strongest man around, you know what I mean? And I wasn't tough like the other boys and tough like typical men, you know what I mean? And I think that's where like my insecurity kind of stemmed. And that kind of sort of built up as I got like a little bit older, let's say 15, 16, 17, like throughout high school, into like sort of like different body image issues, constantly not feeling like strong. And I felt emasculated because of how skinny I was. And like kind of like later on throughout college, I dealt with anxiety and depression. I used to have like multiple panic attacks a day. I used to feel like very, very stressed out because I used to have a lot of issues with control. I didn't really understand that my external or everything around me is completely out of my control, and that the only thing that's really in my control is myself. I didn't really get that. And that sort of kind of built when those emotions became really, really overwhelming. I dealt with issues with depression and suicidal thoughts. But I think that the beauty out of all of it is that through that experience and kind of bursting out of there through the help of like psychologists and stuff like that, is that everybody holds like very, very like immense deep power within them, but they just have to access it and understand that like the power that we all hold kind of all begins inside, and it really begins in our minds. And that through the understanding of like how our brains work, and through like how all these like little processes kind of occur, if you could control every single thing that kind of enters your brain, and you could kind of like release it in a really controlled and well thought out manner, I feel like that's where the power of like every single person kind of like comes from. But we only really understand that part when we go through shit in our lives, and when we kind of like hit that rock bottom. Because when you hit rock bottom, you kind of like burst out an explosion and you just like kill it, you know what I mean? Like yeah. So I think that's kind of like my background or whatever. So
Great. Yeah. Jonathan, you want to share a little bit about yourself? And
Gabriel's like really jumping in there with 2 feet on this one here.
Yeah, I'm going.
So yeah, no, I've not as an intense story. Just very background wise, I struggle a lot fitting in with a lot of my friends or my age group. It may seem like it may have looked like it, but smoke and mirrors, very tough. I grew up in a uni family, and my mom took care of me. I still stick to my father, but you know, it's the reality I lived in back then. My grandfather passed away at a very young age. So I mean, I had lot of stress at home, and school wise, I wasn't. I'm not the brightest tool in the shed. I get by, but and that also accumulated. Also was very tough on me. I had a very hard time focusing when I was a kid. It took a lot of time to really realize, the hardships that I went through as a kid, where I am today. Uh, it's still. I sit back and I think about it a bit more now. It was a lot of social inacceptance with a lot of people. I got beat up. I got bullied a lot when I was in school, in high school. I don't want my kids to go through it. I see a lot of kids nowadays go through it, and it's sad because I want to help, but it's how can you really help? And I think tonight, I think this episode here, I mean, we're all here. I think we're all have the same goal in mind, is to at least bring up that awareness and kind of speak about it. Maybe help. If we can help 2 or 3 people, hey, I mean, at least we've done something good today.
Fabio, want to share a little bit about, I guess, yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a psychologist. I work in private practice. It's about 20 years, and I see people that have anxiety, stress, depression, issues from childhood, and so on. And I think it's great that we're doing this today to share. I think because part of it is sometimes the earlier you get support or help or talk to someone, the better it is long term. So I think part of it is put it out there and saying it's okay to talk about it, to remove the stigma from talking about whatever you're going through, and we can work through it.
For myself, anyways, with my own personal struggles, my struggle was always based on weight and the idea of looking a certain way, and I'm sharing something that practically no one knows, but the people who were there, who experienced what I experienced as I was a kid. From people who know me, I love soccer. I love everything about soccer. I used to play every day as a kid. That was something that I was really passionate about. Watched every soccer movie, followed all these different soccer players, practiced anytime that I could. And one year I had the opportunity when I was young to try out for an intercity team in Saint Laurent. And I know the competition was kind of fierce, but I worked on my game a lot because I was chubbier than most of the other players. Obviously I couldn't keep up with their stamina, but skill with the ball and being able to put the ball in the net, I was always very, very good at. One of the drills to see what we were made of, the coach at the time had us lie in the middle of the field, and imagine my fingers being the legs of all of the soccer players who were trying out. So they would go, in between one another, so that we would have to run through to get to the soccer ball and try and kick at the goalie. So we were moving across the field, and once you kick the ball, you had to stop at the end, and then everyone would do that turn. So I was in the middle, I remember, and everyone was doing their thing, and it was my turn to run. And I remember it like it was yesterday, and I was running through. I remember I had an orange, because Saint Laurent Intercity had that orange and black uniform, disgusting uniform, but besides the point, we're running across, and every name that you can think of to break someone's spirit was said to me, everything. And at the end of it, after being called fat ass, what the fuck are you doing here? What an embarrassment. Who the hell do you think you are? At the end, I was a kid. I was in tears. I was in complete tears. I never tried out for another intercity team again. Even though I vividly remember playing soccer like throughout, my teens, and in house leagues and all that stuff. And the coach would say, "Why are you playing here? You're good enough to play, in a more competitive league." I never wanted to do it again. It destroyed me, and it destroyed my confidence. It just really kind of hurt me, and body image followed me throughout throughout my life. At my heaviest, I was about 235 pounds. Now I'm about 165, 166 pounds. So I lost quite a bit of weight. But in that journey, it was very difficult. I still find myself, stepping on the scale 1 or 2 or 3 too many times, because it's always something that, it resonates in my mind. And I find working in schools and even working with, kids in elementary school, the idea of looking a certain way, who these kids idolize, and having a six-pack or looking a certain way or having the perfect body, destroying these kids. I have 2 little girls at home, and I want them to be and enjoy their childhood. And being in this profession for about 17 years, I found that window of being a kid getting smaller every year. And the kids are having to mature much more quickly and having to deal with pressures and these anxiety and feeling depressed and having to fit in and having to belong and just living with this constant day-to-day feeling. I don't know how you gentlemen feel about that, or if you want to build on.
You know what's funny is, look, I'm 22 years old, okay? So I'm probably like deep into like, it's funny because I don't consider myself, I was at one point really into the whole like social media thing. And it's funny because coming from somebody who's really like at the peak age where like this is all happening, if that makes sense, because we're seeing like this issue with, let's say, social media from the ages of, let's say, 15 years old up until 25, you know what I mean? Like we see this trend of like people constantly needing to either put up like a fake image of who they are to make themselves feel better about themselves, you know what I mean? And it's so easy to do because at the end of the day, anybody can just put up their absolute best image. So example, like when they're always smiling, when they don't have pimples on their face because they smooth it out on an app and etc. But I think that people don't realize that these are like very stressful things, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, hey, if this picture doesn't get enough likes, or if it doesn't get the response that it requires, then I won't feel good about myself. And I think that's huge. It's a huge problem. You know what I mean? And people don't realize the damage to it. Yeah. So
I think the biggest problem is yes, you're absolutely on point on that one. The biggest problem I think is that everybody craves that attention now, that they don't want to, like, they go through the social media persona that they crave it. I want to be like the next, and I hate to say this, I want to be the next Kanye or the next Kardashian. And by the way, if you all want to know, I hate them. I don't care what they are. They've like resculptured or really molded this generation to be so fake. Who has to have the bigger lips? Who has to do this? And the worst part is, out of all that, and I might be going off tangent, but the whole worst part about all that is that the people who follow that don't realize what they're doing is not good for their mental state. Growing up, I was very smoke and mirrors, like, yeah, I'm fine, but I'm not fine, and I wasn't fine. I buried myself in sports just to really get past the bullying and being beat up at school. It wasn't easy at all.
I think that regardless of the time, like whether it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever, the root of people making fun of others or of putting other people down is still the same issue of them being insecure with themselves. And I think that, like, if there's younger people watching this, or whether they're older and they can maybe relate to this, I could probably like put my hand in fire and say this honestly, but I don't think I could pinpoint one person in high school that had it all figured out. Nor can I pinpoint an adult right now that has it all figured out. Nobody has it all figured out. You know what I mean? And people impose their issues onto other people. That's what people do. Okay?
Yeah, just to make them feel better.
Absolutely. You know what I mean? So that's how bullying happens. That's how everything happens. You know what I mean? And you know what's funny, guys, is that, look, we're all not perfect human beings. We could probably all pinpoint a time where we've spoken about somebody else without them being there. Technically, it's cowardly to do, correct? But the thing is that if we actually dive into why we've spoken about somebody else negatively in the first place, because there's something that they're doing that we might not agree with, but there's some type of insecurity as to why they're different than us. You know what I mean? And I think it's interesting to see that even though it's human nature, it's like, how do we kind of like correct those things like as we grow up and everybody around us as well. You know what I mean? But,
yeah, you know, it's with in the past 10, 15 years, studies have shown that there's a rise in anxiety and depression among young people, and you know, they're kind of wondering what's going on. Why is there more anxiety and depression in the past 10 years with the youth than, you know, let's say 20, 30 years ago? A lot of it is saying maybe is it the social media, which the pressures that the teens are feeling today compared to, you know, a generation before. That's one hypothesis that's there, or maybe they're reporting it more because we talk more about mental health in schools and on Bell Let's Talk and so on, so it's more open, maybe. But definitely there's a lot of pressure with social media. And
I also think it has to do a lot with the parents nowadays. As a parent, you know, I have my faults. I'm not a perfect parent. I love my kids to death. I love my wife to death. But I think a lot of the issues also stem towards the parent side, and in not having that that open communication or that open line with the children. Tell them, hey, you know, this is not right. I went through it. You know, talk to me. Like there's that stigma now, yes, of mental health and everything, but that communication to end it, I don't feel as if it's there. I mean,
well,
I mean, there's correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel as if maybe, you know, as a parent, like, oh, you know, like talk to me about it. Let's see. There's a conversation, yes, but I don't feel as if it's a genuine conversation. I don't know if I'm making too much sense, but
I think you don't understand it. If you don't get it, you can't have a conversation about it. I think that's the issue, is that I think there needs to be like and this is the toughest thing, and Fabio could probably back me on this, but it's like nobody can really identify what anxiety is or what depression is. Like there's no real way to like say this is what it is, because for every single person it's different. So it's a tough conversation to have, because there's such a broad spectrum to it that it's really hard to speak about it, because like one child can feel it one way and then somebody else can feel it in a completely different direction, that you're like, how the hell is there that much of a discrepancy? You know what I mean? But I think that like through speaking about it more, people kind of start to understand like, okay, anxiety is maybe more along the lines of like being nervous or feeling out of control as to what's to come in the future. Or perhaps depression is maybe more in the lines of looking at the past and not being able to understand that it's gone and that you can't control it or go back. But how it all stems from this concept of control. You know what I mean? But it's like if people kind of just get that simple kind of outline, it's easier to listen to somebody and kind of like look at it a bit better. But like, how do we educate an older generation of people to understand that? You know what I mean?
Well, I think, yeah, you're saying, Gabriel, if I may, yeah. You know, there's on a continuum from a bit of anxiety that we all feel, which is normal, part of life, stresses that we feel. And maybe a way to understand is just magnify what a person's feeling when you're stressed or you have an oral presentation, magnified by a lot. Then you're looking at an anxiety disorder where it's more severe. It affects your functioning. It affects your, you know, your stress. You can't eat. You can't sleep. Same thing with depression. You have moments where you may feel down. We all go through the ups and downs, but again, it's the severity and how much it affects you, and that's kind of a difference there.
So which leads me to my point that I wanted to get at, and the intention of this podcast is to find means of coping and means of talking. I think you know, Jonathan was alluding to the point where, you know, having genuine conversations and having people you trust to have those experiences, having them you know, or someone to confide in is extremely important. And do you find that that's the direction that we're heading? I'm hoping so, because, you know, every day you hear a different story of how people are feeling now, being also confined in this very difficult time, right? A lot of people have a lot of time to think about what's going on within themselves, you know, and you know, and finding a way to kind of cope, right? So for myself, the way I've always learned to cope is through being physically active. I think it's something I can control, something I can push myself to do, and finding moments where, you know, of reassurance. So I think we need to discuss those two avenues, coping mechanisms and finding people we trust, because, you know, like I said, all of this for me stems to, I can still see that kid standing in front of my desk and wishing I could have, saved him. He was questioning his sexuality. His friends basically dropped him, and everyone who loved him, basically, from my understanding, did not appreciate the lifestyle that he wanted to be. He was being authentic to himself, and he became so alone that he got dependent on, from my understanding, with a lot of drugs, and he couldn't take it anymore. So I want to help, and the intention of today is to want to help those people that feel alone, and to make them understand that it's okay to speak, and it's okay to get help.
It's definitely okay to speak and to ask for help. It took me years to actually even speak about it. I mean, just having this panel right now is like, it's not easy. I mean, I'm pouring myself to the world, basically, just like everybody else is. But the point is that we need to make everybody understand that they're not alone, and in order to get past it is exactly that. You're not alone. There's people out there who are going through similar situations. Open up, talk, call, text. There's the children's helpline, there's kids helpline, there's plenty of other forms that you can do it. If not, like there's family members, there's best friends. I mean, real best friends. Let's not talk about BFF who is gonna wear the same shirt as you when they go out. It's like, no, like actual BFFs who've gone through shit with you, who've put up with your shit, who've fucking listened to the stupidest things that you can do. I mean, those are the people that you have to sit down and really reevaluate.
I think what's interesting about when we speak about mental health and stuff like that, and it's kind of going with what you're saying, is that I think people need to just be really, really bluntly honest with their emotions. You know what I mean? And really get to the root of what their actual feelings are. And I think that the biggest issue with mental health disorders is that people don't really know what they're feeling. And I think that it's you think it's one thing, but it could be something completely different. And I think that what's nice about stuff like Bell Let's Talk and et cetera is that they really do promote speaking to a psychologist and going and seek help and speaking to somebody. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, I think that's the beauty of marriage. I'm not married at all, but you see happy couples. My parents have been happily married for over 25 years, something like that. And I think it's great to have that support system, that you could be married to somebody, you could be with somebody, and you could speak to them. But I think on the same token, it's nice to be able to speak to somebody who doesn't really know you and can really assess you based on what you say, based on that situation. They have no idea who you are. It's like a blank slate. You know what I mean? And you could be fully honest about it without that fear of judgment. I think that's the beauty of seeing a psychologist or speaking to somebody.
I agree. I hear what you're saying. It's I think it's also a question of severity. And some kids or teenagers, there's normal stuff that you go through, that's normal teenage stuff, let's say, if we're talking about teenagers. But then there's some people that experience more severe levels of anxiety or depression and so on, that a lot of things, friends help, I think, parents help and so on. But if it gets to a more severe state where you may have to consult a doctor or psychologist or so on, I think it's a question of severity of what they're suffering. Because a lot of people may suffer in silence, and that's the concern.
You can even look at if you look at certain things like the loss of a loved one, right? Where that's permanent. Especially in these times, a lot of people are grieving and can't have that proper goodbye. There's a lot that we need to address. When we talk about depression and anxiety and having these conversations, I always think about the person who passed away, was very close to me. When I think about this, my grandmother, who suffered Alzheimer's, and for me felt like a very slow death, because of the fact that it was the killing of someone's soul. It was and it's a horrible disease where at the end of her life was not the woman I remember, and and like I said, sometimes you're faced with and I felt sad for a long time. You know what I mean? I felt really uh, unable. No one was able to address that feeling of sadness because it was out of my control. So I'm looking at life from that perspective, that I can sit in that feeling of feeling helpless or do something positive to maybe support somebody else. So when that happened towards me, uh, I did something proactive to kind of help people who suffer from Alzheimer's, and I created a couple of fundraisers to raise money for that disease. So you can sit in that feeling of helplessness, because life happens, and the things that happen to you, you can't always control, right? I couldn't control those individuals talking to me the way that they were, but I can control my actions, and I can control how I react to people in situations. So
You know what's funny is that like we're all speaking about, let's see, very different specific scenarios of hardships we've all went through, and it's weird because I think that like I don't know about you guys, and I'm pretty sure we could all relate to. I think we could all relate to this. Is that I'm very thankful for every single hardship I went through. I'm like super grateful that I went through it, and I'm glad I went through it at the time I did, because I think that we're a product of our experiences, and I think what's important to recognize is that like I don't know about you, but I don't remember growing as a person when I was like extremely happy or when everything was great. That never happened for me. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I think that I cherish fantastic and happy moments, but I've never grown from them like immensely. But when I've really like hit rock bottom, that's when you really start to test who you are. Like what's your purpose? What's your identity? That's when like the big questions kind of get answered, if that makes sense, or you're kind of in pursuit to answering those questions. And I think that like if people start to kind of take an approach where when I'm going through something tough, this is just this is a period in my life where I will evolve as a person. If people start viewing it that way instead of like this is it, this is over, like everything is black, everything is dark, or this is a huge storm, I think that people start to view it in more of a positive light. I think that would make a very, very big difference. And I'll tell you guys why. The way that I kind of live my life right now, and I have a tattoo of it, I have plenty of tattoos everywhere, but my favorite one is seek discomfort. It's funny because I heard about this expression before that it was supposedly coined by some YouTube channel or whatever it was. But I think it's important that every single day we do something that is uncomfortable or that we don't like doing. And I'll tell you guys why. Life isn't butterflies and rainbows. It definitely is not. You know what I mean? But sometimes when shit hits the fan, you got to react and you have to go through with it, and you have to kind of stomach some type of discomfort to kind of get through it or get past that bullshit. And I think that the issue is that like a lot of people, let's say, are faced with adversity and they crumble like from the pressure of it. And I think that you're tested as a person when you're able to overcome that sense of adversity. And I think that like by doing something comfortable every single day, whether it be something physical, like with physical fitness, or trying to do something that you don't necessarily like doing, that's how you kind of build a bit of character. And I think that's like an important thing to speak about. And like Vince spoke about it earlier with like physical fitness and getting yourself into shape. I really do think that physical fitness and making your body uncomfortable to the point that it's about to crumble, but it adapts, I think that that's what conditions your soul to be strong and powerful and to get through this lifetime. I think that's like, I have a really strong value with that, you know?
So adaptation, which is a great point, is how do we adapt to today's normal? Because like being in the profession that I am, the normality of the lives of some of the students that I have, I don't know how they function, some of them on a day, you know, like when it comes down to the nitty gritty, there are people in their homes right now that are dealing with issues of family members who are sick or dying, or there's abuse, or there's no food on the table. And there's all these different things and all these different anxieties that, you know, people may not be aware of. And this new normal, I guess, for me anyways, is maybe that because I've never realized it, is frightening. I'm like, and I think Jonathan, you said it before, if I was a teenager today, I think it's the toughest time to be a kid ever in all all of life, just because of all of this constant bombardment of trying to fit into this mold, you know?
I mean, it's exactly what you're getting at. I mean, think of it this way. Back when we were in high school, we didn't have the social media. And if we would be living the quarantine back when we were in high school, I don't think as if the pressures would be as great as they are today. I mean, they're not in school and they're still on social media and they still get that pressure and they're still getting, like oh, I don't look this way, I'm not doing this, and I think we all agree with that 100%. It's today's world, or today's generation is definitely not the generation or the world we grew up in. And it will never be. We can pretty much, how we grew up, it's done, it's finished. There's a new mold, there's the new future coming in, and we need to make sure that how we move forward is really how the children nowadays, and how not just children, even adults, how they cope with this, how they react, and how they adjust to it.
Once we realize that it's okay to talk, and that's why, Fabio, it's so great to have you here with us today, because knowing Fabio for so many years, obviously being a family member, is being the thing to master is listening, right? I know I always tell my students and people that, I find everyone is very quick to talk, and I think we're losing that ability to listen like we used to. I don't know if people, everyone is reactive, and I think my best friends have always been the ones who listened to me the most, who stopped and didn't have to say something because they knew how I was feeling. The person that I remember sitting beside me as I was just going through some shit, and didn't have to say a word, but knowing that they were there and they were quiet and they were listening. I think people need to realize that that's a skill that makes a part of every great relationship. I think the people that I love the most know that they listen to me and they know how I feel, and I want the people who are listening to understand that there are people that love them, that care about them, that want them to be okay, and that these people need their voice to be heard. And if it's through a professional help, through a psychologist, or through a best friend, but finding support and letting it come out, I think is key.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Vinny. The relationship that you have with the people around you, that's really what helps combat, let's say, down moods or depression or stress. It's the relationship. So having those few people, whether it's a family member or a best friend that you could open up to and they listen, not judging you and just accepting the way you are, that in itself is therapy. And in my session, sometimes I have sessions where I just listen the whole time and there's not much that I say. The person feels just that it's the first time they spoke to anyone and they really listened to them, and it made all the difference. So yes, the message out there is let's listen to each other, not judging, just caring and supporting one another.
I really like how you said that, because I think that a good therapist, and I like how you said that, is somebody I think everybody has their own answers within them, if that makes sense. And I think a therapist's job is to either question them for them to come up with their own answers, or sometimes just, like you said, just being a really good listener, and then kind of as the patient or the person is just speaking, they just kind of oh wait, this all makes sense now, and they come up with their own answers.
Yes.
If that makes sense, because
Absolutely.
in times of distress, I don't remember being a very good listener. Even if my therapist did speak to me and try and give me, let's say, some type of advice, I was so distressed and messed up that I couldn't interpret it well. But when she would question me, and I would kind of come up with my own answers and then apply them in everyday life, and then kind of revert back and then speak about it in the next therapy session, it just all kind of came together full circle. And I think I really like how we're having a conversation about being a good listener, because it is definitely something that's not taught in schools. I don't know what it is. It's just it's not something that's very common nowadays, if that makes sense.
I think it's a building block of every great relationship, right? You know, the foundation of every relationship is trust, and with trust, hand in hand, listening, I think. And I think there's a generation of a group of people, and maybe I'm generalizing, that maybe feel unheard. And because they felt unheard, they're finding ways of coping. And these negative ways of coping are making it very, it's just making it very difficult. I just, like I said, I always revert back to, like, even this year, I've had conversations with people who are on the fence about taking their own life. And I've obviously guided them to get some professional help. I find these types of conversations are that people are having are happening more and more. And I just don't understand what's happening to us as people. What's going on? Like,
can I be honest with you? I think it comes down to, and I like to speak about this type of topic often, but I think it just comes down to being mindful. I think that a lot of people kind of like live in this fantasy world, like we spoke about a lot, like social media and stuff like that. And all these like ridiculous pressures popping out of everywhere, and pop culture, and what's sexy, what's not, what makes me cool, what doesn't. And if we're constantly living in this world of fantasy and fakeness and etc., it's very easy to kind of go to these conclusions of like, hey, like I just want to end it all. I can't handle this pressure and I don't know how to feel. But then when you kind of like sit back and just kind of like sit in the moment, like I find it's pretty awesome that we're having a conversation right now. We haven't once looked at our phones and started texting other people and speaking to other people, or looking at something else, but we're generally just connecting as human beings. And I think that's, like you said, like listening, being a good communicator, trusting people, and just like building, like what's the building blocks of just like communication and speaking to people. I think that if people base their relationships like that, instead of like through their online personas and what they appear to be to other people and etc., I think there'd be a very big change in terms of like people getting to these conclusions all the times of like, oh, I want to end my own life, or oh, like this depression and these feelings of anxiety are so over the top that I can't function anymore. You know what I mean?